千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Eric Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. So now, without further ado, let's get back into Tao Te Ching, chapter 14. As a recap on the chapter title, this chapter is about the Tao Axiom, and we're about to get into exactly the meaning of the term and all of its implications. We previously talked about the Tao Axiom referring to the primary principle of the Tao, the great truth of spirituality that remains unchanged no matter what. So there's a lot more to dig into, and there's the connection or the connectedness of all things at all levels of reality. But first, let's do a quick recap on what we have talked about so far. Here is how chapter 14 looks. 21 lines, longer than the previous chapters that we have studied, still manageable. We were able to break it down into multiple sections. 3 main sections. Section 1 goes from 1 to 8, lines from 1 to 8. And section 2 goes from line 9 to line 17, and then the last 4 lines are section 3. As you can see here in this slide, the shorter lines depict a subsection within the section. That is, section 1 has the last 2 lines as the concluding lines for the first section. And then transitioning to section 2, the first 2 lines there, line 9 and line 10, begin the second section. And by highlighting the Chinese characters in the corresponding translations, we can kind of see the poetic structure of the original text. So this is what we talked about before. And let's go ahead and get into the content, a recap of the contents that we talked about. So one of the major concepts that we discussed last time was that everything comes from and ultimately returns to nothingness. And that, of course, includes us. We're no different. We too come from the nothingness of the Tao. At some point in time, we're going to have to return to the source. The source is where we came from and where we return to, just as it is for all things. The second recap is another key concept that we talked about last time, and that was how the Tao has no beginning and no end. It is eternal. The way that Lao Tzu wrote about it, the way that he expressed it, was that with the Tao, we cannot see its beginning or its end, or as he expressed it, we cannot see its head or its tail. This is just another way to say that Tao has always existed and will always exist. no matter what, there's some kind of principle that's involved to allow things to be as they are. So the Tao being eternal and we being the reflections of the Tao, we take on the characteristic of the eternal within us as well. So this goes into another recap from last time. This is what we ended our discussion previously. As we manage our existence today, what we want to do is to take advantage of generations past to learn from their experience, their triumphs and challenges, everything that they have gone through, everything that they have learned. The distillation of the wisdom of previous generations is the Tao that we study. We can, of course, also study widely from all different wisdom traditions, and we're doing the same thing. The Tao tradition that we're learning now goes back really far, and we're about to dig into that history as well. So, when Lao Tzu wrote about the ancients, he meant ancient to him, just as he is to us. So, we think of Lao Tzu as being incredibly ancient, 2,500 years ago, but the masters that he studied are from previous generations to him, and they go back 2,000 to 2,500 years from him. So from our perspective, it would be tracing back in history to 4,700, 4,800 years ago. So we'll talk about that as well. Either way, what we want is to leverage the Tao, being the oldest, most proven system, the most successful, the most well-applied system of all. And the remark that I provided last time was that because Lao Tzu stuck to the fundamental principles of reality and humanity, every word that he wrote is applicable today. As we go through the Tao Te Ching, there's not one thing that we have to modify or ignore. There's no cherry picking that we need to do. Many other ancient books, including some books in the Tao tradition, have elements that reflect the times that they were written. And therefore, for those things, we will have to look at them, take a second look at them, and then decide what to keep and what to skip, but not the Tao Te Ching. Absolutely every character is golden, solid. So anyhow, let's explore further from this point on, this ancient Tao, this proven Tao. So this line 20, one can know the ancient beginning. Knowing the ancient beginning, it just means connecting with the authentic Tao. There's any number of new interpretations of Tao, oftentimes from misinterpretation due to mistranslation that we see out there today. I think it pays to go back to the authentic source and figure out exactly what it was that Lao Tzu and the other ancient sages were actually saying, and reduce or minimize the misunderstanding, mistranslation, misinterpretation as much as possible. That's what it means by being in touch with the authentic Tao. And how do I know? How can we tell that what we study is truly authentic and truly accurate? There are multiple ways. We can take a look at the internal consistency of the Tao Te Ching itself. We can take a look at the commentary that's been passing down through the ages. Admittedly, most of the commentary has been written in classical Chinese, which even native speakers of Chinese today regard as extremely difficult. So that's what I can bring to the table to share with everyone. Fortunately, I've had the training to be able to deal with the ancient text as if it was my native tongue, which indeed it is. So, wielding this Tao to manage our existence of today, the more we wield it, the more we can understand how it came to be. And let me also say, when we talk about knowing in this context, it's not just familiarity or study. It's an in-depth kind of knowing. I'm talking about immersion, absorption, and application. The Tao has to be applied to life. There are definitely people who don't like hearing me say that, but that's how it has always been in the most authentic traditions of the Tao. Now, when we look at the ancient Tao, we begin to see some things or have epiphany about some things. We may go into the Tao thinking that it's one of the religious practices in the world. When we study the Tao more deeply, we realize that it is a way of life rather than a religious practice. To make it a religious practice is actually to categorize the Tao to one area of life when the Tao can be applied to all areas. This is why it is so important to have the application part of it. There's definitely a gap between just intellectually knowing the Tao and living the Tao every day. Now, we all know, so to illustrate that as an example, we all know that wisdom has to do with the slow and steady wins the race. That's a wisdom, that's a piece of wisdom common to all of humanity, east or west. We don't necessarily follow that wisdom though. Sometimes we want to take shortcuts. Just because we intellectually know this wisdom, know what we should do, doesn't mean we actually do it. And that's how we make things more difficult for ourselves. In the Tao, all the different concepts that we have studied, they tie together and they reinforce one another, which is why I say that is synergistic. They tie together synergistically, so the collection, the whole, is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, walking this path on your journey of life, this path is something that requires commitment. It requires consistency of study, that you regularly go back to it. However, once you get into it, you definitely see the path is not a difficult one to walk. There aren't that many requirements. Indeed, in the Tao, there are no hard and fast requirements. Life is what you make of it. But the Tao is such that it will respond accordingly. We quickly learn it is in our best interest to align with the Tao so things can go smoothly. Next slide. This is the last line of the chapter, so we're arriving at the end. Line 21 says it is called the Tao Axiom. What is the Tao Axiom? Daoji in Mandarin. The Tao Axiom is the oneness or the unity of the Tao from antiquity, since ancient times. A timeless principle, something that will last and endure along with humanity. It is the oneness. It is the one Tao. The Tao Axiom is the Tao that cannot be seen, cannot be heard, cannot be touched, as we have learned in a previous chapter, and yet it is ever present It is everywhere, and it unites everything. Our emphasis is on oneness and unity with the one Tao, in the sense that everything is connected in the most fundamental level of reality. So the one Tao reveals all principles of the Tao. It is the great spiritual truth from which you can derive all the key concepts of the Tao. It can be applied to all aspects of life, no matter what it is. It could be for work, for play, for yourself, your family, loved ones, friends, acquaintances, co-workers, people in general, every aspect of life. Although, as I said, there are people who follow the Tao as a religion, it is meant to encompass everything else, as well as religion itself. What I mean is, if you do have your own religious practice, the Tao is something you can easily incorporate into it. If you do not have a religious practice, the Tao applies to everything other than the religious. It is not just a philosophy, it is a way of life. So this bullet here becomes the one path you follow in your journey. This is where I transition from calling it a way of life to the way of life. It is the way of life as you follow your journey through life. It is also something that connects all levels of existence. In ancient times, the sages could already see the truth of this. But in modern times, we can see even more of this truth. What do I mean by that? Well, science and technology have not invalidated the Tao. It's quite the opposite. Let me share some thoughts with you from the frontiers of science on how you and I are fundamentally connected to the universe itself and to each other. Here is the idea. The more you and I learn about the universe through science and technology, but filter through the perspective of the Tao, the more we see the unifying connectedness of everything. We see the connectedness in the many ways that the micro reflects the macro. The very small reflects the very big. The personal reflects the cosmic, and vice versa. The big reflects the small as well. I'm showing this image here of a galaxy full of stars. It is because you may have heard of the term star stuff. You may have heard that you and I and everyone else is made up of star stuff. What does that mean? In the early universe, more than 10 billion years ago, everything was mostly made up of hydrogen atoms. There are multiple lines of converging evidence, like the cosmic microwave background, that tell us that in the early universe, shortly after the Big Bang, elements like carbon and oxygen did not exist. Mostly, the universe had just hydrogen. This was bad news for life and living things. For us, we could not exist back then. You and I are made up of carbon. You may have heard that human beings are carbon-based life forms. And we need oxygen to live. We need carbon to exist. We need oxygen to survive. These elements simply were not there, not present, did not exist. Then hydrogens formed stars in the early universe. Within those stars, gravitational pull, producing hydrogen atoms going through nuclear fusion. The stars burn brightly. Within those stars, the nuclear fusion of the stars created heavier elements, helium, then carbon, then oxygen. These elements within the stars were the essential ingredients for what will become life, and they were all forged within the star furnace. When the star reached the end of its life, it would go supernova. This will be an explosion that scatters all the created elements inside of it, spreading the carbon and oxygen elements throughout the universe. Now, heavier elements eventually will produce planets, and the planets, some of them, will produce life. That's where you and I come in. Some of the life gained sentience and intelligence on a planet called Earth. So this is why scientists say you and I are made of star stuff. It is because every molecule in you existed inside a star billions of years ago. This is true of everyone. Everything we are made of used to live inside stars. That means our connection to the stars is not just poetic or philosophical. Literally, it is a direct lineage that can be traced back in time. And the same physical laws that govern the stars themselves apply to us the same way. Or in other words, the Tao of the stars and the Tao of you is in reality the same Tao, the unified Tao Axiom. And this is not the only way that we can see the direct connection. So looking at the same galaxy, but in a smaller frame, this is what we see a lot of when we look up at the night sky, when astronomers look through telescopes. We see galaxies. Many of them, including our own Milky Way galaxy, are in the form of spiral galaxies like this one. This spiral pattern is one that we can readily recognize because you and I have the same pattern right on our fingertips. Everybody has fingerprints. All fingerprints have the same spiral pattern. Therefore, it is literally true that we all carry the fingerprints of creation with us at all times. The spiral patterns that we carry around, sometimes we use them for identification purposes as we go through life, but more than that, they authenticate us as citizens of this universe. There's more. When scientists zoom out from galaxies to the largest scale possible, they can examine the distribution of matter throughout the universe. So they create an image to demonstrate their understanding. This results in a different kind of image, not a spiral pattern, completely unlike the spiral pattern of the galaxies, but no less fascinating. You can see their tendrils reaching out from one galactic cluster to another, forming these tenuous connections among them. It seems familiar, and it should, because it looks just like the image of neurons in the brain. Those connections among our brain cells are the neural links. You're basically looking at the neural network of your mind This is, of course, natural intelligence and not the neural network of artificial intelligence. So not only do you have the imprint of the galaxies on your fingers, now as you can see, you also have a reflection of the universe in your mind. So in a real sense, every person is a universe unto itself. Or we can say the universe exists in you just as you exist in the universe. And this brings us back to the Tao Axiom, the one Tao through all levels of existence, from the macro to the micro. So then the question becomes, the ancients did not have our science and technology, so how were they able to see the connections of the Tao in all levels of existence? The answer is that there were many things that the ancients could observe to discern the oneness of the Tao, or the Tao Axiom. They began with the Tao of heaven. This is also called the heavenly Tao. It is also known as the Tao of nature, or nature itself. This includes everything, good and bad, positive and negative, life and death, absolutely everything. The Tao of heaven has good weather, bad weather. There's sunny days, rainy days, just absolutely everything. There's the daytime, there's the nighttime. There's the sun, there's the moon, there's the stars. Then the ancients turned their gaze around them to observe people, the Tao of people. This level of the Tao is about society, the interaction of people, the role of a ruler ruling the kingdom or empire, looking after all the people. A wise king will try to understand the Tao so he can become more effective to bring benefits to the kingdom and its people. Not all kings were wise, of course. Same with people. Unlike the myriad things, the living creatures, the animals, people are different in being able to make decisions. They think for themselves. They make choices for themselves. We reflect the Tao in that if we move in alignment with the Tao, we get excellent results. If we move against it and engage in things like contention, violence, hatred, we end up with failures. Both excellence and failures are part of the Tao. As I said, the Tao of heaven, there's good weather, there's bad weather. The Tao itself is impartial. It does not care what choices you make. And that's the theme of the Tao Axiom. Do whatever you like. The principle remains constant. It hands out consequences, positive and negative. It has no emotions, no regrets. Knowing this, we move to the Tao of the individual. In the Tao Te Ching, the Tao of the sage. So when a particular person among the people figures out the connection between heaven and people, the Tao Axiom governing all, that person may decide to align with the heavenly Tao, with the positive aspect of it, to begin a personal transformation toward sagehood. So at this level, the Tao is very much about the individual, you as the ruler of your life. Your life is your little corner of the entire world. This is about your mind, your body, and spirit. The thoughts, ideas, concepts, learning in your mind, health and fitness of your body, the cultivation of your spirit, the growth, development of your soul. The wise person, like the wise king, will try to understand the Tao in order to have a better journey through life. So the Tao Axiom runs through all of them. There is a consistent overall principle through all of the above, so that every level reflects every other level. This, by the way, the Tao Axiom, is how we can be so confident that with the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu isn't just addressing royalty, like kings and emperors. He's not just addressing them to advise them on how to rule. This is how we know for sure Lao Tzu is directly addressing us, you and me, because we cannot be away from being a reflection of the Tao. So there are many examples of how Lao Tzu himself thought about this. This is the Tao Axiom, the one principle through all levels of existence. I'll give you a couple of examples. In Tao Te Ching, chapter 77, it says the Tao of heaven reduces the excessive and adds to the lacking, meaning the Tao of heaven is a balancing mechanism. Everything evens out in the long run. Then chapter 77 goes on to say the Tao of people is not like that. The reason why Lao Tzu wrote those words is because he observed, even in ancient times, that people jumped on the bandwagon. If something is popular, it becomes more popular. If somebody is downed, disliked, hated, everybody does a pile on. So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The Tao of people who do not know the heavenly Tao, they add to the excessive and they take away from the lacking. So the Tao of sages, looking at this, in chapter 77, it says, well, who can offer their access to the world, become more of a balancing mechanism like the heavenly Tao? Only those who have the Tao. And that's why the sages do what they do. And that's why they achieve without claiming credit, because that's what heavenly Tao does. Another example comes from the very end of the Tao Te Ching, and there are tons of examples. I'm just picking out two of them. In chapter 81 of the Tao Te Ching, it says, the Tao of heaven benefits and does not harm. If you focus on the goodness of life, the fact that you and I are living at all, that we have this opportunity to pick and choose, find the best path for ourselves, it's a great benefit. It's a gift to be alive. The Tao of sages, it says in 81, follows the Tao of heaven so that the sages are a benefit to the community. It says in 81 that the sages assist and does not contend. So these are the way that the Tao is reflected in different levels. This was how the sages conceptualized the Tao Axiom, connecting everything together in ancient times. So they did pretty well, even though they did not have all the equipment that we have. Now, I want to provide the ultimate example of how one can derive many different concepts from the Tao Axiom and how one can return from the many back to the one. So you have seen examples in modern times, in ancient times, on how the Tao basically runs through everything. It connects everything, links everything together. Everyone who studies the Tao eventually will arrive at that epiphany that you can feel. Such was the case for another ancient sage, Confucius. Now, Confucian teachings are sometimes thought of in academia as being opposed to the Tao. In reality, Confucius learned from the Tao. He was a student of Lao Tzu. He too learned the Tao of the ancients. It was equally revered, ancient to him as well as to his teacher, Lao Tzu. So from his studies, his conclusion was, 无道一以贯之. My Tao is the one that goes through all. When he realized the Tao Axiom running through everything, this was the statement that he made. This statement meant the Tao that he was learning and wielding in everyday applications was the Tao of the ancients, was the primary principle that ran through every aspect of his life. And all of these derived from the Tao Axiom. Now, I want to use water as an example. Water, one substance, and yet representing myriad principles of the Tao. What are the principles? Well, let's round up some of them. First, the soft overcomes the hard. Water demonstrates that to be true, water can penetrate through rocks, like the dripping of rocks, cutting through stone, the flowing of water, cutting canyons into the ground. The soft overcomes the hard. Water also demonstrates the ultimate flexibility. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote that water goes to the left, water goes to the right. It's like a flood. It finds a way. And water nurtures all living things. So this is easy to understand simply by observation. Imagine that you are standing on the bank of a river, observing how the water of the river is feeding the myriad things. The plants or the animals that come to slake their thirst. Water nurtures all living things. These are principles that Tao cultivators seek to emulate. So in everyday reality, Tao cultivators want to use the soft and not the hard. Use the gentle instead of the aggressive. And Tao cultivators want to be flexible in applying the Tao. They keep the goal consistent. The goal can be the same, but the approach can be different. And the principle of nurturing just means that Tao cultivators are kind and practice compassion to others. There is also the principle of non-contention demonstrated by water. Water contends against nothing and no one, and therefore nothing can fight against it. Moving on when it is done. So Lao Tzu observed that when the work of water is done, nurturing all living things by the river, it flows on. It doesn't stick around to claim credit. And water is good at staying in the lowly places, the principle of humility. To be humble, to stay in the low places means having no need to elevate yourself, to become highly visible, to assume a high profile. So there's a lot more to it that Lao Tzu has talked about. Lao Tzu talked about the timing of water. in the form of rain or snow. He spoke of the depth of water, like a very deep pool, as a metaphor about having depth of character. He also used the reflection of a placid pool of water, the clarity reflecting its surroundings. That is a metaphor for fidelity. The point is this: all of these different concepts and ideas and principles, they all derive from one substance, water. One idea, water as a symbol for the Tao. Now, the reverse direction is the final thought about this chapter. Just as the Tao gives rise to everything, the Tao Axiom gives rise to all the ideas and teachings and wisdom in the Tao tradition, we can also look at it in the opposite direction and say, because everything originates in the Tao, everything will trace back to the Tao as the ultimate source. All the ideas and teachings that we have talked about, they trace back to the oneness of the Tao Axiom. In the Zen Buddhism tradition, this is the expression: 万法归一, all dharmas return to the one. So this particular phrase, the first two characters, literally translated as 10,000 dharmas. The first character, 1, means 10,000. Second character, 法, means dharmas. The 10,000 dharmas mean all the manifestations of the world, meaning everything. It also means all the dharmic teachings of wisdom, all the wisdom. They return to the one because they trace back to the ultimate source. So what is all of this telling us? In the clearest possible way, Lao Tzu and the sages are saying, if we can stay on this one path, not depart from this Tao of the ancients as we go through life and manage our existence, then our world comes into natural alignment where everything is smooth and seamless. Life is good. If we cannot do that, if we stray from this Tao of the ancients, then our world becomes increasingly chaotic. Nothing works. Life becomes full of frustration. This is why we say one can know the ancient beginning. It is called the Tao Axiom. So remember, this ancient beginning, this Tao Axiom, this is the one. Hold on to the one and you win the world. This concludes our line-by-line discussion of Tao Te Ching 14. Let's go to the paraphrase for chapter 14. Our purpose, as always, is to demonstrate complete understanding by expressing the original meaning with modern language. So, in section 1, we begin by talking about the characteristics of the Tao in that it cannot be seen, cannot be heard, and cannot be touched. So how would we paraphrase that? Here's what I would like to offer. The Tao is not a thing or an entity. It is all around us, but we cannot see it with our eyes. It gives us whispers of wisdom, but we cannot hear it with our ears. It is quite real, but we cannot grasp it with our hands. Therefore, we say it is invisible, silent, and formless. These three characteristics are associated with the Tao as a unified way of existence. Now we move into section 2 which goes into more descriptions of the Tao, as well as, most importantly, its eternal nature. Here is the paraphrase I would like to offer. The Tao does not shine or reflect light, and it cannot be described as bright or dark. It functions continuously, creating all things, which eventually return to nothingness. When we tap into it, we too are able to create. We can invent form out of formless ideas and create art out of imageless inspirations. It seems strange and miraculous, but this is the way it has always worked and will always work throughout eternity. So now the final section. This is to conclude this section by pointing to the Tao of the Ancients and the Tao Axiom. Here's the paraphrase I would like to offer to everyone. Our task is to take the ancient teachings and apply them to the modern world. The more we know about its beginning, the more we will understand the Tao as a unifying axiom for everything. That is the paraphrase for 14, and I think you would agree with me when I describe this as one of the more profound chapters of the Tao Te Ching. And now, finally, the full circle discussion for 14. In the last lines of Tao Te Ching 14, Lao Tzu talks about knowing the ancient beginning of the Tao axiom. So we can link this back to the beginning, and we see Lao Tzu describing the Tao is that which cannot be seen, is invisible. So when you link this lack of the overt visibility, something that can be seen, with the Tao axiom at the very end, we get the following message, and it's a clear message. In order to practice the ancient Tao, one focuses on internal work that cannot be seen by other people. As you are refining yourself spiritually, the changes are not going to be evident to the people around you. Only in time, when you have reached a certain level, will they begin to notice that your behavior, your demeanor, your aura, the feel, the vibe have changed. Then they may ask you a question, what's going on with you? But initially, it is definitely not something that can be seen. One day, the Tao in you, having this effect on life that can be seen, it will still remain unseen. You become sort of like gravity. The effect that gravity exerts on objects can be seen, but gravity itself cannot. It's like that with the Tao. Therefore, we end this chapter by quoting the lines. One can know the ancient beginning, it is called the Tao Axiom. Having gone through all those discussions, I think these lines will hit very differently. So this is the final discussion for this entire chapter. We have wrapped up 14 and we're ready to move on. First, we want to summarize the last part of Tao Te Ching 14. We went through this particular slide last time. However, I think after our discussion today, it will hit differently. The eternal Tao and you. The Tao is eternal, and so are you. And when I say you, I'm addressing the deepest core essence of who you are. That is the part of you, the centermost part, that is eternal. And this is to apply the concept of eternity to that innermost self. Consider how that would change you, as we talked about last time. Then we go back to the concept of the ancient Tao. The ancient Tao, from the beginning, which now we have identified, is 4,800 years ago. This is the distillation of incredibly ancient wisdom. It was already proven as being very effective by the time of Lao Tzu. Today, we see even more evidence, more proof to its effectiveness. So we can benefit from the experience of previous generations, which now includes 4,800 years of history. And finally, it's all about the Tao Axiom. The connection among Tao teachings create a unified whole. This is what I referenced when I said that the Tao had a synergistic totality to it. When you put the whole thing together, it's much more powerful than just the sum of its parts. And the encouragement from Lao Tzu, from me as well, is to apply the Tao to every aspect of your life. And this is to wield the ancient Tao to manage your modern existence, your existence of today. So our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.